The St. Lucia Solid Waste Management has provided context to an alarming voice note which surfaced here over the weekend, suggesting that expired foodstuff which was scavenged from the dump site could be on the market again following a raid. According to Mr. Laureanus LeFlores, Acting General Manager of St. Lucia Solid Waste Management Authority, while there are issues with waste pickers at the landfill, what was said in the voice note is false information to cause malice. He explains that while they are not allowed inside the landfill, a few manage to gain entrance via alternative routes.
From the time the Deglo landfill opened, we had a policy whereby we do not allow waste pickers at the site because it's a sanitary landfill. The previous site at Cicero, we allowed it, but it was controlled. So we will not allow waste pickers to come to the landfill. However, we're having a lot of threats made to our staff by persons coming to the landfill to basically scavenge for food items, basically. Okay, they do not come through the main entrance to the site, but they come through the hills. So what happened is that it's difficult as long as a senior officer would go to the tipping phase and get them out. They would come back. They would threaten the staff that we have on the tipping phase, and it's a difficult situation. The police do not have the resources to be present at the site when we need them. So that's a challenge for us.
Unfortunately, he adds that they managed to gain access to expired perishables dumped by supermarket giant Massey stores, which contained fruits, vegetables, and cheese. In addition, LeFlores adds that Massey stores did not adhere to the dumping arrangement with the landfill, which gave the waste pickers access to some of the discarded food items.
Massey stores brought in perishables to dispose of at the landfill, and those included fruits and vegetables, including cheese. Now, normally the procedure for dry goods, which would be canned items particularly, Massey would, and we have that long-standing arrangement with Massey, whereby if they need that to be disposed of, they would do that on first days alone. So that what we would do, we would prepare a hole in the landfill, dig a hole in the landfill. Massey would come in with the items, they would deposit the items in the hole, and then we would bury those items. So persons don't have access to that. So what happened in that case, the perishable warehouse did not follow that procedure.
LeFlores maintains that the scavengers were able to pick small quantities of goods from the landfill. Reporting for Hot 7 News, I am Daniela Edwin.
Daniela Edwin, a report taking us into this edition of Beyond the Headlines, sponsored by Flow. On this edition, we flip the script a bit. Stay with us. We've just received an update on that situation concerning the Canada farm workers. Stay with the broadcast. My next guest is already online, and then I will not keep him waiting any longer. So joining me now on the line, the video line, the Chief Environmental Health Officer, Mr. Parker Ragnanan, for discussion on the topic, the public health challenge, disposal of expired, contaminated or spoiled food items. Mr. Ragnanan, good morning. Thanks for waking up early. I see you already at work, so thanks for agreeing to come on.
Hi, thank you, Mr. LeBon, and thanks for having me in your program. And I look forward to a very fruitful discussion this morning. And I also want to thank your viewing and listening public. And I trust the discourse this morning is going to be enlightening and would show some light on some very critical matters that deals with public health and food safety issues.
Absolutely.
So
Likewise, it's a pleasure to have you on. We know the current issue, but the concern is even broader than that. There is a national health concern. So let's start off with the role and the mandate of the Environmental Health Department.
So the Environmental Health Department is guided by legislation. And as far as food safety is concerned, we are the authority for St. Lucia responsible for food safety. That is legislated. There is the Public Health Food Regulations number 70 of 1980. It has been amended several times, and only recently we have recommended for further amendment to this piece of legislation. But the Public Health Food Safety Regulations really is the mandate for establishing food safety for St. Lucia. And so when we speak about food safety, we're talking about the whole gamut of activities from the farm to the table or to the pallet, so to speak. And therefore, it would include both locally produced as well as imported foods into St. Lucia. To go along with that, we are talking about manufacturers. Under the Food Safety Act, there are other legislation that we can speak about that deals with food safety in a very specific way. So, for example, we have the bakery regulations, and that would deal with bakery products,
Right.
your pastries and bread and so forth. So there is the bakery regulations, and also there is the slaughterhouse regulations, and that deals with wholesomeness of locally processed meats, poultry, and so forth, to ensure that it is safe for consumers. Therefore, the mandate is a very well legislated mandate, and our role at Environmental Health is to ensure that unsound and unwholesome foods are not placed on the market for human consumption. Therefore, we need to work very collaboratively with a number of key agencies, such as the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, the Bureau of Standards. These are other partner agencies that we work together with to ensure compliance and to ensure safety of the foods that are available for consumption.
Your role is very, very important as a department if we are to keep our citizens safe with what they're consuming, and if we are to protect the health of the environment. You have a very big job. Does the department have the necessary legal support to give it the teeth and the authority to carry out its mandate, that very important mandate which includes safeguarding public health?
Yes, we do have the legal mandate. However, we recognize that we are in a changing environment. And that is why I said earlier on, there are several pieces of legislation that are down for review. What we are looking at, not just as a country, but as a region, is to see how we can harmonize regulations. And especially St. Lucia being a member of the OECS, there have been several initiatives aimed at harmonizing food safety legislation within the region, and that is ongoing activities. However, where the bottleneck may be is that we do not have an environmental court in St. Lucia. And therefore it means that when it comes to litigation, you have to go through the same processes as criminal matters in order to get a matter heard before the courts. And so there is a little challenge in that area. However, there is an active public health board, and the public health board has a mandate as well, because the environmental health unit division, it functions under the public health board, and therefore matters of serious concern can be raised at the board, and the board has certain authority under the Public Health Act that allows it to carry out the mandate of ensuring food safety. What does that mean? It means that the board, for example, can actually close down a food establishment if it is not meeting the public health standards.
Okay, interesting that the board has that authority. But what role would you see a public health court playing in better strengthening what we are doing and our management of food and environmental safety practices?
Well, we need definitely to have a public, an environmental health kind of court, where matters of the environment, of health and safety can be looked at in a manner that is expeditious and may not be stalled together with all the criminal cases that you have in the system. We think that is important. One of the things that we found is in trying to litigate, it's usually a very long and a trying process. And sometimes it actually takes years to get through the system. And there are times when we're talking about issues that needs immediate response. And therefore, we think that an environmental health court would allow for greater latitude and timeliness in terms of responding to matters of the environment and public health.
Excellent. And we look forward to perhaps a development like that in the not too distant future. But the board has the authority. Bring us up to speed. It's interesting that you're saying the board is quite active, but what capacity is there for monitoring of what happens within the market space and surveillance? Or does the board come into play when a report is made?
So the board is actually separate to the Department of Environmental Health. There is an Environmental Health Division that functions under the directive of the Public Health Board, and that is really the executing arm of the Public Health Board. And that is where we have a food safety program. We have a national food safety program, and as part of our national food safety program, there are officers who are trained in food safety and assigned to conducting inspections of food establishment. As a matter of fact, prior to COVID, because COVID sort of put into disarray some of the activities that we were engaged in. And by that I mean you would recall that the food industry was probably one of the hardest hit industry during the peak of COVID. And so food establishments, many of them went out of business. They were open intermittently. Maybe they were open for 2 weeks and then closed for 2 weeks. And it created some problems in terms of actually monitoring, because we're talking about all different types of food establishments, from the restaurant, the supermarkets, the wholesalers, the food manufacturers, the itinerant vendors, the street food vendors, and every single one of them, the liquor shops, grocery shops, they all come in under the food regulations. And what was happening is prior to 2020, every year there was a list that was being submitted and was also on several newspapers and the Gazette outlining establishments that had met the public health requirements for operations. And so if you check back, you would see the names literally published of food establishments that had met the requirements to be in operation. That is a measure that we are now going back to ensure that the public is aware that there have been establishments who have met the requirements for operating in St. Lucia, and therefore we are looking forward very shortly to resume that activity of publishing food establishments that have passed the inspections. Apart from the inspections, we're talking about foods, and I think that's where you want to zero in. Foods come in different sorts, and there are a number of situations that can arise to make a food unwholesome. So we're talking about the presence of an adulterant in a food product, or we're talking about a food that has elapsed its expiry, that have elapsed its shelf life and has become expired. We're talking about a food that has not been kept according to the correct specification for holding temperatures. We're talking about foods that have been produced under unsanitary conditions. And so there are a number of factors that can render foods unfit for human consumption. And that is where we come in, and we work with other key agencies who also have an interest in the food industry. Therefore, an inspection of food products is done. We are now rolling out a program to actually allow us to be able to do microbiological testing of foods. And we just launched that new initiative with CAFA. And CAFA St.Lucia is providing us support, lab support, in terms of being able to do microbe testing on our food products. At
what point will you be doing those microbe testing? At what point of the supply chain?
Yeah, different points. So they are, we can look at the raw products, we can look at the processed products, we can look at the cooked, ready-to-eat products. Clearly, a plan has been devised to look at the foods in the different form of processing. And what we're looking at is really what is called the Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point System. It's called HACCP in short. And therefore, as part of a system of that nature, it builds on two pillars. One is what we call standard sanitary operating procedures and good manufacturing practices. And then you develop a HACCP system. And a HACCP system really would outline for you what areas in your process that are critical to ensuring the safety of the end product. And therefore, we need to ensure that whatever mechanisms that are built into the system to ensure food safety at the critical control points are in place. And so we are looking at, like I've said, both imported products as well as locally produced products and finished products to be tested at different food establishments in St. Lucia or at the points of entry to ensure that what we are getting and what we are putting out for public consumption is meeting the requirements.
Definitely a step in the right direction, and we applaud your department with the support of CAFA for moving there. Speak to us about the collaboration with perhaps the Bureau of Standards and the other key players, Port Health Authority. What's collaboration like, and how important would collaboration be in protecting the goals that you hope to achieve?
Definitely. We recognize that the food industry is a big industry. It's a vital industry for St. Lucia. We all eat, and that is important. There are a number of stakeholders, and you mentioned the Bureau of Standards. Whereas we have the law, the Bureau of Standards assist in terms of developing standards within the food industry. So, for example, there is a standard for bakeries.
Yes.
There are different standards that you get based on the Codex Alimentarius that St. Lucia is a signatory to. And there are a number of other standards that have been developed, and we clearly recognize the need to work with standards. So therefore, in terms of revising the food regulations, we want to incorporate the local standards that have been established. Apart from that, standards presently are voluntary standards. So it makes it difficult to enforce. That is why the law takes precedence to a standard. But we recognize the value of standards in ensuring, one, the quality is maintained, and secondly, the safety of the product. So we work very closely with the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. We have officers who sit on several technical committees as well as counsel at the Bureau of Standards, all in an effort to work together in terms of the development of standards within very critical area that impact on environmental health. And I just want to say that food safety is just one area. Water quality is another area. We're talking about beauty and wellness facilities, the barber shops, and there are a whole gamut of areas that we work very closely with the Bureau of Standards in ensuring that adequate standards are available for the different industries. We work very closely with the Ministry of Agriculture. The Ministry of Agriculture, for example, when it comes to meat and poultry products, they issue a license of import along with Ministry of Consumer Affairs. And when products come into the country, if there is any suspicion that it may be expired or it may have found itself in a situation where the temperatures were violated, or whether it comes and there is excessive feathers, for example, on the chicken and so forth, we are called in because we, apart from inspecting a food item and making a decision that it is not fit for human consumption, we also have the responsibility of providing documentation to the importer or the proprietor of that food item. And that is a document that is legal, that they can actually use to claim from the insurance, for example, loss of a product and that kind of thing. So we would provide what is called a condemnation certificate to the owner, proprietor, or importer of a food product that they can use as a legal document. So we work very closely with very key agencies. Port Health is a unit under my supervision, established at the point of entry. So environmental health is responsible for Port Health surveillance, and therefore we work even at the ports in terms of not just the bulk cargo, but what we call the break bulk, and that is when it comes in small quantities and goes through the shed at Slasper. There is a certain amount of inspection that has been done there and assessment as well.
Thanks for that, Mr. Ragnanan. And I say to my viewers, stay with us. We will zoom in just a bit and take you over to the Dayglow Sanitary Landfill, which I know has piqued the interest of many St. Lucians over the last 24 to 48 hours. The Environmental Health Department, where Mr. Ragnanan is based, they're very instrumental in assisting with the management of what happens at the landfill as well. And my producers are also alerted that we are lining up to present that footage on Dayglow. Mr. Ragnanan, just backstep with me for a bit. Before COVID, the department took the bold step to publish the names of businesses which meet the standard, the safety standards for operating here. Whatever happened to those businesses which don't meet the standard or didn't meet the standard? How many of them don't meet the standard currently? And when last have we seen the board take the firm decision in shutting down an establishment here?
The board has not shut down an establishment. The board works with establishment. Okay. The whole aim of the industry is to ensure that livelihoods are protected and people continue in business. At the same time, it must be done with an environment that is safe. And so what the board has done and continues to do is where establishments have been forwarded to the attention of the board, the proprietors, owners of this establishment, or the operators have been called into the board and they have been in very deep discussions. And what the board would do many times is to allow a certain amount of time. So many business places, they come with a plan and they say, within the next 2 weeks, we're supposed to do 10 things to get us to standard. Within the next 2 weeks, we're able to do 5. And within the month, we're able to do 8 of them and so forth. And basically, there is some kind of dialogue and negotiations where you see that the business places are willing to work with the board and they simply ask for additional time to be able to implement some of the measures that would ensure that they meet standards.
That's excellent, Mr. Ragnanan, especially if you're a business person. But just bear with me here. Protecting livelihoods is the priority. Whose and what livelihood is given precedence here? The livelihood of the business owner or the citizenry, the consumers who may be more at risk?
The citizenry, definitely, we are there we are the custodian of public health, and so the public health take priority. And every establishment, it's difficult in a few minutes to explain it to you, but in our inspection instrument, for example, we have in the food industry what we call very critical areas that would impact very critically on the product. For example, one of our critical area is holding temperatures. If we come across a business place and there are no facilities for hot and cold holding, that is a critical area. And there are many of these as part of an inspection process that would outline very, very critical areas that need immediate response and attention. And there are some areas that are important but not as critical as those areas. So we look at holistically an inspection and to see how many of these critical areas are in violation. Like I've said, there have been food establishments that have been closed. There's no doubt about it. We continue to work with establishments at all time. We are concerned about the health and safety of consumers and of the public.
Excellent, and thanks for that clarification. Thanks for that clarification, Mr. Ragnanan. But you'd appreciate an environmental court would perhaps not be so lenient as the board.
Yes, we appreciate that. We also think that there are other issues apart from food safety that really needs attention. One of the biggest areas, and maybe sometime we can look at it, has to do with public complaints on matters that are affecting their health. And some of these presently that we are confronted with are issues of spraying from furniture manufacturing and garages. We have issues with charcoal making. We have issues with waste disposal. There are issues with animal rearing, and we get a number of complaints from the public that takes a very long time to be resolved. And sometimes you have recalcitrant people who are not willing to do anything. As far many times what you find happening is neighbors are not living together in harmony. There's disagreement, there's vexation and so forth, and they use these as being spiteful. And it can take a very, very long time to get these matters resolved. And so I think that there are a number of serious environmental health issues and environmental issues as a whole that needs to be addressed at a higher level. And by that I mean at a court level.
Excellent. Let's zoom in now on one of the issues, that of waste disposal. And I'll start with the role of your department, the Environmental Health Department, as it relates to providing oversight and disposal of expired, spoiled, and contaminated food items. What is your role here?
So, firstly, before we get to that point, my office must be informed either through somebody who is in possession of an item indicating to us that this item needs to be inspected, either because the refrigerator broke down or it has elapsed its shelf life, it has become expired, and so forth. So we work with the importers and the distributors of food items. We also have active assessments, and sometimes when we go on the supermarket shelves, we would pick up items that have become expired and so forth. And a determination is made. So firstly, we do the inspection, and secondly, we render whether an item is fit or unfit for consumption. Once the decision has been taken that the item is unfit for human consumption, it is technically condemned. And so what it means is we say to whoever possesses that item that you can no longer offer that item for sale. You need to check into your stores and see how many of it you have, and you are the custodian for it, you need to give us a record. If it's 10, 20, 100 tins or cases, whatever it is that you have of this product, and it must remain in your custody. We further give you instructions that you need to contact the St. Lucia Solid Waste Management Authority to make arrangement for disposal, and you would inform us as to the date and time for the disposal. Once that is done, our officers would accompany the product to the landfill and ensure that it is disposed satisfactorily. However, that do not preclude you, Mr. Labon, if you have items in your stores, you own a business place, and you've done your stock and you realize that there is some dead stock or some items that have been on your hands for long, and you want to get rid of it. It doesn't preclude you from personally having your business, put it on a vehicle and take it to the landfill and dispose it. You still have that option as a business place. And many times we get this happening. We get business places who on their own, without our intervention, would dispose of certain products that they own. And therefore they are not looking for any documentation from the government of St. Lucia.
But given Mr. Ragnanan, your important role in protecting public health and environmental health, and the key job that you play in oversight with the disposal of those items, shouldn't there be greater cohesion and a standard that there is a protocol, environmental health must be present, and that we don't leave it to the interpretation or to the satisfaction, the wants, the likings of the business person in particular?
Yeah, I think we can look at that. Coming up with a protocol may be a challenge, because even the method of disposal is not spelled out in the law. The law says it is disposed to the satisfaction of the officer. What does that mean? It means that it gives the health officer a certain amount of latitude as to determining the best method of disposal. Now, it depends as to what systems you have in a country, and different countries have different systems. So, for example, there are items where you actually need an incinerator to destroy. But do we have an incinerator here? That is lacking. And so we can clearly see that there are need where you need an incinerator to have items destroyed, but we do not have access to an incinerator. So we need to look at what is the next best option that you have. And so the next best option may be open burning at a landfill, or it may be burying at a landfill, or it may be disposal at sea. And one has to be very careful with disposal at sea, because there are conventions on the MAPOL that would prohibit certain types of disposal at sea, and how far it can be done. So there are a number of factors that one must take into consideration in terms of looking at the safe disposal. And I believe that is why the law is so broad. It's not too subjective, but it allows the health authority latitude in terms of looking at the product, the risk associated with that product, and the best method available within the limitations of your country in terms of ensuring that it is safely disposed of.
Bear with me a bit, and I thank you for that. Let's take a closer look at what the law says. Clause 7 of the Public Health Food Regulation number 70 of 1980. Familiar with that law, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. It speaks to the disposal being carried out, as you said, quote, to the satisfaction of the inspector. Not too subjective, you think? Shouldn't there be actual requirements not stipulated in that particular regulation? And doesn't it leave it open for some level of some level of corruption maybe? Because let's be realistic. You're dealing with a business person and one individual, the inspector. The business person there is a cost, of course, associated to the disposal, and there may be profit associated to some of the items being disposed. Shouldn't there be actual stipulations in those regulations which takes it away from the authority or from the which takes it away from the inspector himself or herself?
Yes, I'm getting where you're going, Mr. Labon, and that can be spelled out. I mean, I'm not saying it cannot. We can. I mean, in the law, maybe in a best practice kind of standard, we can look at that for us. Okay. But given the uniqueness of every country, it's very difficult to say that if you have a 40-foot container of chicken, that this is the prescribed way to dispose it. There are options that can be available, but given where we are at in St. Lucia, and that is where the challenge is at, we have one landfill, just one landfill. Yeah. The question is, how do we dispose it at that landfill? Do we recommend, because ideally it would be best to have these items incinerated, so you burn it down completely. But we do not have the luxury of an incinerator. So you would need to look at the next best option. And the next best option is actually burial. Burial within a landfill. And that is why we're saying that the manufacturer need to make arrangements with the solid waste. It's not the officer making that arrangement, but the officer would mandate the owner, proprietor of that product as to how it needs to be disposed, and say to that owner that you need to make necessary arrangement with the authority who has the mandate to ensuring safe disposal of waste, and inform us of when that is done based on the instructions we've given you. Further, the certificate that is produced must articulate very clearly how the disposal was done, and that is for safety barriers, that it is done satisfactorily, and therefore I must tell you that given some of the constraints we've had for years, we've been involved in the disposal of foods. Actually, it might surprise many of us to learn that on an average yearly basis, the department oversees close to the disposal and destruction of 1 million pounds of food every year in St. Lucia. It's something that has been going on for many years.
1 million pounds of food on the small island of St. Lucia. Mr. Ragnanan, that's a bigger discussion that goes beyond your office at environmental health. That's a discussion that must be had with the Chamber of Commerce, the National Consumers Association, and the private operators of some of those establishments. 1 billion pounds of food. I'm sure.
1 billion, not billion.
1 million, I'm sorry, 1 million pounds of food, not billion, 1 million pounds of food. It's still a lot. I'm sure if we go downtown Constitution Park right now, there are some good citizens who could do with a small percentage of that 1 million pounds. So that's what I'm saying. It's a discussion that's far beyond your desk at environmental health, and I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that the individuals in authority will have the appetite to engage in that discussion. The current setup, Mr. Ragnanan, with disposal practices, the current procedures, how sustainable are they given our limited land resource?
That's a matter for a lot of discussion. It requires multi-stakeholder discussion. Clearly, we have challenges in terms of getting adequate land space for having landfills. This is a challenge for us. I mean, we've seen what has happened to the landfill at Viewfort, and now mostly everything is taken to that one central landfill at Deglo. And I can tell you that very soon the carrying capacity would be exceeded. We needed to look at proper options and safe technology for disposal of waste. One thing I can tell you is that as we develop as a country, as we have more persons living in the country, more business places opening, there's going to be increased solid waste that is generated, and that has to be managed properly. We also have, apart from the normal household and the business place solid waste, we have issues with construction waste, and we have other type of waste that is also being generated that must also be disposed of satisfactorily. There are some challenges. There are certain chemicals, for example, right now, because of how toxic they are. They are highly hazardous chemicals, and presently there are no provisions to be able to dispose them on island. So there are some challenges we need to look at as a nation, how best we can respond to some of these challenges, and what systems can be put in place to ensure that that waste that is generated is satisfactorily managed. We also have opportunities as well from waste disposal that can be looked at, but that is for a whole different discussion. Absolutely. And it would really require some national consultation to come up with probably the best mix in terms of waste management for the country.
Absolutely. Mr. Ragnanan, when I listen to you and I get an appreciation that we don't have an incinerator, which should be the best and preferred option in waste disposal for certain types of waste. Our only landfill is close to capacity. You said very soon we will have reached the capacity at Deglo. When I listen to those sentiments from you, so it seems to me, and that's not on you, that's not on the Department of Environmental Health. As a nation, we are a good few decades behind in as far as where we should be with waste disposal. Go back with me a minute to Deglo. Let's go back to Deglo, guys, as well. It's said that waste is big business, Mr. Ragnanan. Or can be big business. Are you satisfied that there is the professional integrity of all those who are involved in the system of disposal here, so that we do not compromise human health through the consumption of some of these items on the basis of people trying to make a quick buck?
That's a very difficult question in terms of questioning person's integrity, and I do not want to go down that road, Mr. LeBon.
Okay.
What I can tell you is we need to look at systems that are firm enough to ensure that there is adequate management of facilities. We need to look at systems that are well established and resilient to be able to safeguard. And these are the important factors. Scavengers have always been at waste disposal facilities. It's a question of managing and so forth. How that is done, it's always a problem. But we really need to continue to work together to strengthen the systems that we have, and at the end of the day, to ensure that any unwholesome food product does not get back to the market for consumption. And I can tell you, far and large, this does not happen. It's not very often you would hear of any food item that gets to the landfill coming back on the market for sale and for consumption.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Let me get some reaction from you. Just recently, it doesn't happen based on your report quite often, but just recently we received confirmation of some food items which were taken away from the Deglo dump and made itself in the market space. Are you familiar with that Deglo situation, and how concerning is it for the Environmental Health Department?
I am not very familiar with that situation. Internal investigations indicate that we did not supervise any disposal last week or the week before at the landfill. I've heard of a voice note that is going around. I cannot authenticate that document. I think it would be best placed for the Solid Waste Management Authority to respond to that concern. I'm not in a position to say yea or nay as to whether any or to validate the voice note in any way.
All right. The bigger concern here is that based on your preliminary investigation, your department didn't supervise any disposal.
That's correct.
So I was pressed a little earlier that there should be some standardized procedure that environmental health is there, but we've gone over that. So perhaps we can move on. To conclude, Mr. Ragnanan, what's your vision for us as a small island with limited resources? Where would you hope we will be in the not too distant future as a St. Lucian society which is doing better in protecting public and environmental health? What is your vision?
I really want to see greater participation from all of us as St. Lucians in terms of taking responsibility for our health, taking responsibility for our environment. The dependency syndrome cannot continue the way it is done. There are simple things that we can do as residents, as people with a certain amount of pride and dignity to assist ourselves. And I'm hoping that we'll get to a stage where we will take ownership for our environment. We will take ownership in terms of ensuring the safety and well-being of our communities, being free from mosquitoes, for example, and rodents, ensuring there's beautification and persons take pride in terms of managing waste and not haphazardly disposing waste. I would like to see a country where we are come to a level where we can make informed decisions. We found that in some instances, the very persons you try to protect are the same ones that do not give you the support in terms of protecting them. And so we want persons to be informed and enlightened and be able to take ownership for the decisions that they make, and to ensure that we are living in a place where we appreciate our health is important, and we have that responsibility to take personal responsibility for our health and well-being.
Yeah. Let's hope, Mr. Ragnanan, that we get there very, very soon. I want to thank you for your time this morning. Very insightful. I sure hope that we didn't press you too much outside of your comfort zone, but you shaped up well, and I think you handled the department's affairs this morning on this platform with a distinction.
Thank you very much, Mr. LeBon, and thanks again to all those who've listened. And if any person has a query or they need additional information, they can contact us at 468-3700 or 454-6329, 459-7329. We have offices at Bois-de-Wange, at Vieux-Fort, and Soufrière, respectively.
Excellent.
So thanks again.
You're most welcome, Mr. Parker Ragnanan, Chief Environmental Health Officer, speaking to us here on this edition of Beyond the Headlines. Beyond the Headlines this hour brought to you with the kind compliments of Flow.
Pay full price for your mobile when you can pay half. Just bundle your home internet and mobile services with Flow and save 50% on your mobile bill. That's money in your pockets every month.